Cool.
Hi, everyone. We are here at the SF space. I'm actually in a room full of people, but we're all on our separate Zooms for reasons I can't explain right now. Thanks, everyone, for joining. And I will hand it over to Adam, who will be our moderator in our discussion and fireside chat with Nick Pinkston, a good friend of mine, and who was requested as a speaker in our last LFOT. So yeah, Adam, take it away.
Sure, thank you. Just a little quick intro. Nick is currently building a company called Volition. He's a 3-time founder who builds tools that push the boundaries of productivity and expressiveness for engineers. One thing that I think is particularly interesting is this is not the type of engineers that most of us are here. These are engineers that build real physical products and have them manufactured. He also has a lot of thoughts on industrial policy, economics, and local politics. So I'm excited to have you here today.
Yeah, it's so good to be here.
So maybe to start out with, so you've started 3 companies. There's kind of a common theme running through all of these.
Yeah.
So what's that journey been like? How did you get started? And like, what are you trying to do?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, I think that I would say that, firstly, I grew up in like a manufacturing family in the Rust Belt. So I'm from like north of Pittsburgh, east of Youngstown, Ohio. And so I just grew up doing that shit, learned machining when I was like 12 or something. And I used to build cars and rockets, electronics, all that kind of shit. And I just thought it's too damn hard. And I still think it's too damn hard, too damn expensive. And so, what I did is I had this journey of like, first I worked with my hands and I actually learned to code because I had to use C to reprogram the engine computer that I was fucking with to make turbocharging actually work on my car. So like, I didn't actually do any web stuff. I'm a horrible web person. I like more low level stuff and I suck at everything now. But, essentially I made a hacker space in Pittsburgh. So like, that was the thing is first it's like, well, I need tools. Didn't have enough money for tools. I had a little construction business, got a little bit of tools, but then I got a lot of them donated. HackPgh is I think in its 12th or 13th year now, so still going. So that's awesome. That's the first hacker space in Pittsburgh. That got me into the open source movement. Never heard of that growing up because I'm from like middle of nowhere. There's no one who knows about open source there. So I think those are 2 themes that run through my life. Like one, I love building shit and making tools that build shit because I think building shit is too hard. And then I'm from like this like kind of poor Rust Belt town and all the economics and social stuff that happens with that, I think a lot about too.
Got it. Can you tell us a little bit about like Volition and like maybe how the previous companies you built have like led into?
Sure. Yeah, well, Volition's in stealth, so I'm not talking any public about it. But yeah, I mean, basically it was like you do one company, you realize something about the industry and the market, and then you just keep doing more to solve it. So like at HackPgh, it was like, cool, let's like get tools, but like we can't get every tool. So then I started a company called CloudFab, which is like a manufacturing marketplace. And then we had a bunch of manufacturers on the system, and we had automated systems that would take a 3D file and then quote it. Then you could go out to different people and get the parts. And so this was like, okay, let's like make that more liquid. And then I realized that like each of the factories actually was super old school, and it was like just humans all the way down. It was extremely automated or extremely not automated. And so then I moved out here and made Plethora, which is an automated machining company. And essentially what the company did is we had a bunch of metal cutting machines. So if you've ever heard of CNC machining, it's like you take a block of metal, carve away what you don't want. It's like, it's programmed, but a human programs it. So we said, what if we can make a compiler that would go from the 3D file and specs to all the code and all the other scheduling and systems to do it. So kind of like cloud manufacturing was the idea. And so, there it was like a big thing that we looked at was how can we get a plugin into every CAD system? So when you're designing, all those rules of like, you can't cut this with this. And, there's all these things you need to do, which is called manufacturability. And so DFM, design for manufacturability, was a big part of it too. So analyze the geometry like a debugger. And then we had a compiler that would compile to this, kind of runtime of the factory. So that's how it was. And really like the factory was a huge limiting factor for us because scaling fucking factories is hard and we never got our compiler to be 100% automatic. And so then I left and then I started Volition, which is an engineering tool that I won't get into, but it does plug into all the CAD systems. And the idea being that like, this is the most scalable thing that we could do. And so I'm interested in making the platform company for the industry. And then my take is that there are 4 companies in the industry that make all the tools. There's no open source really in the mechanical world. Like all the shit is proprietary. It's Autodesk, it's Dassault Systems. And these are old companies that you can't switch away from. So, Boeing is not going to put their plane in a new CAD ever. And so they got them by the balls. So my thing is like, well, you have to plug into those CADs to actually make change. And so I'm all about like modifying the CAD that exists so you can make one kind of plug in an environment that modifies all the other environments, essentially.
Can I ask, are we open for questions?
Sure.
Why do you think that, like, companies that make the like McMaster CAM, or people that take your 3D drawing and help you tool path it,
Yes,
don't do more of this complete flow already? Like, why are they ignoring this opportunity?
yeah, there are a couple people, it's fun. I see every company in this space. It's funny because, it's a tiny space.
Yeah.
And, all the CAM companies are made by mechanical engineers who learned programming to solve this problem. And I would say they're not super great at computer science in general. A few people, like I would say Proto Labs is a public company that happened. So a mechanical engineer did software, actually was good at it, and made a thing for primitive parts. And no one has, even Plethora has not made a system that can do it for everything. And so we had a hybrid human computer system that would do that. And I advise other companies that are taking different paths at that. But I would say that like a lot of times it's because mechanical folks are learning CS, they're not mathematicians. And, I had 10 PhD mathematicians working for me, and it took forever. It's just like it's edge cases all the way down. And so now people are using AI and simulation approaches to try to kind of get outside of the special cases forever thing. But as we know, AI is not a panacea. So I think it's just really hard. Most of those companies don't have the free cash flow to invest in that. And you're taking a license fee. You're not getting all of the stuff going through. So you actually aren't getting that much margin back to contribute to the giant engineering thing you have to do. And so I think there's an economic imbalance whereby you should have your own company that does it, capture more margin, and then you own the CAM. That's like what the better economics are. It's still really freaking hard to make the software.
So you talked about the growing up and the impact of seeing economic development in Pittsburgh and stuff. What sort of policy changes do you think are valuable for American industry? Do we need a new industrial policy here? It's kind of out of favor lately. And
well, it's coming back. Yeah, maybe it was out of favor 3 years ago. And I remember I was at the White House maybe 5 years ago talking about this. And then recently with a few people in Congress, and I have a paper coming out with data for progress actually on our recommendations for how to do it. And yada, yada, American industrial policy is generally driven by the military. So it's often the machines we use, the machine tools, they were invented for the Air Force to make faster jets. Basically, they needed really complicated shit to make jet engine for airplanes and the little foils inside the turbines. So they invested all this money to make automated machine tools. The Navy later is like, man, those things are fucking hard to program. We should make software that makes it hard to program. That was in the 80s. So it's like the government continually had to make these things because industry, like I said, no one company gets enough profit to spread it. And these are really hard technical problems. They're not even really venture capital fundable-ish. It's very hard to fund this stuff. And so right now it's up to the government to do these kind of moonshots, And so our thing is well, okay, that's one. I would love more money, but in the government, it's always yeah, everyone wants more money. And the procurement industrial complex is really hard. So our recommendation is lean into that military shit. There's all these spare parts that all the jets and everything are falling apart with. And we can actually use that demand to enforce how a new manufacturing regime could work. And it's taking a lot of the patterns from software engineering in some ways and applying them to the manufacturing world. So that's kind of I can go super deep into it, but I don't like tariffs. I don't think we should just oh, let's do the same thing as other countries, but just tariff the other countries. I don't believe in that. I think we have to make manufacturing better. I think we haven't done any investment in manufacturing or CAD since the 80s. And so I think there's this massive thing to do. And we're seeing little bits in the, last night I was at the manufacturing CEO happy hour. There were 40 of us. It's the entire industry, in one bar, in the mission. It's kind of crazy. Yeah, I know. I was if someone blows this up, we're fucked. This is half the startups that do this are in this room, which is insane because manufacturing is this giant thing. We have all these millions of people employed by it. And yeah, there's no policy. So I actually want this group of CEOs to actually I'm okay, come together. It's one trade organization called the AMT, which is a lobbying organization. I'm I want to be able to go, later next year to various political bodies and say, I represent half of American manufacturing technology. And I want to talk about how America can level up like we did in the past, because that's how it's always happened. That's generally my take.
So the way this would look is they may issue an RFP for some modernization program, and then you would help guide like what sorts of things go in that, and it needs to be like using this modern technology. And
there's a few different things. Yeah. And like, I think it's out of scope probably here of exactly what it is, but yeah, there's certain things that can force certain manufacturers to do stuff for like, if you want this contract, you need to comply with this. There's also like NSF, SBIR, you know, DARPA, all these orgs fund different things also for this. There's a bunch of defense alphabet soup that does this stuff too. None of them talk to each other, and it's like some general gets a command for 2 years and leads, and like it's that kind of stuff. And like you talk to people, like I remember I had every branch come to Plethora. You know, I had the Marines and the Air Force, and everyone telling me the same shit. And I was like, yeah, cool. I know how to solve your shit. It's like I need like 10 million bucks. I will point you to the companies, and we will glue it all together, and we could solve it. You know, and so it's for not even want of technology. It's want of like basic policy and access. And I'm like, cool. If Lockheed wants to make all the money, I don't care. I just want the technology to exist and to be plugged together. I actually don't care if like other companies make money. I would love the startups to make money too, because I think these companies will end up acquiring those startups. But you know, I'm more like, I just want to see the technology in broad use, you know.
I was listening to a interview with the guy who started Strong Atomics, which invests in fusion fusion startups. And there was a similar problem there where like every single one of them had their own like main long pole. And then, but they all shared a bunch of risks below that none of them were really incentivized to work on, but collectively as an industry. And so like somebody like the government can step in and like really help.
Yeah, totally.
So your tagline on your Twitter profile is a meta-modern left accelerationist.
Yeah.
Can you explain what that means?
Yeah. Oh, geez. Okay. So two different terms. So, you know, accelerationism comes from Marx's Fragment on the Machine. I'm a big fan of Marx. I'm not a Marxist, but I'm Marxian, I would say. And so, you know, what that was is if we want to move past capitalism, we don't need to resist capitalism. We actually need to push it until we go beyond it, basically. So I think a lot about what I call capitalist jujitsu, which, you know, in jujitsu, you use the enemy's you know, force against them, right? And so when we went from the feudal to the capitalist regimes, right, the basically peasants got money from their actions because free property, you couldn't steal. Catholic Church says you can't steal, so they could accumulate wealth. And eventually they became these like, you know, non-noble lords essentially. And then they said, we want a House of Commons or we're going to hire a bunch of mercenaries and like ice your ass, you know? And then they did. And so like these things were very much bourgeois revolutions that happened from like the 16 to like mid 1800s that then made the capitalist regime put there, right? And so I really care about like how we could make new financial and economic forms to make, and in many ways, I think that the tech class is actually like the industrial class was before us, and that's the thing from the mercantile class killed the feudal era, the industrialists modernized our governments, and the tech class has to reform the governments and actually push past the current capitalist regime. I would say the capitalist regime is based on capitalists actually controlling what decisions happen in society. I don't like that. I think it should be more democratic, yada, yada. So accelerationism is like, how do we accelerate the process, as the quote goes. Metamodernism is about cultural regimes. So, you know, everyone starts off in a state of traditional culture. Traditional culture is in, you know, whether you're Christian, you're an American, like whatever it is, that's traditional culture. And then the modernists came out in like, you know, call it the late 1800s and said, what if you just did from first principles in science and rationality, none of that other stuff, blow up all of tradition, blow up all of emotion and rationality, and just focus on like the math and the concrete material. And they have this project called modernization, and the entire world that we live in, like everything we have, this entire room, all that shit is kind of based on the modernist project. But the modernist project was highly naive, like not everyone wants to be the same. It was really human, like it wanted to like meld us into these things and make us run by numbers. And the postmodernists saw this and they were like, this is critical theory. And postmodernism really said, yo, moderns, like not everyone wants to live that way. And then there's all this critique, and that's great. Society got better from those critiques, but the postmoderns never had a project. The metamoderns say, we want the synthesis of those two things together. And our like synthesis is basically that the project for humanity is to put human development at the center of society. And that is our charge. And so for me, like I see that as a central thing that guides my philosophy and my politics and my economics and my business and life. So like, how do I make that happen? You know, tools enable people, but also I can corrode the industrial class with what I'm doing. And then I do political and I do economic stuff to that end. So it's everything leads up to one thing. I like being integrated. Yeah.
Very good. When you say like human development, are you thinking on the scale of like the individual or sort of like society collectively?
Both. Yeah. I mean, for real, I think most people are not at the frontier of the possibilities in their life. Most people could do more. I mean, we are the most privileged people in this room, right? And we still have dreams for ourselves that are unrealized because we're not funded, we're not in contact with the right people or whatever. And we are the 1% of the 1%, like where I'm from, everyone's poor as shit, addicted to meth and opioids and shit. So like, they are really not that. And so, I didn't even know this was a world. I was lucky to get out, and so I'm like, well, how can we just make that enabled for everyone? So that's the individual level, but certainly at the societal level, we have to do some political stuff. And that's why I care about political economy and what are the bases of power. One of the reasons I'm Marxist is Marx said that the material world produces a class, like the elite, the industrial class, and then, the agriculture and the feudal class, right? Those are the two regimes. And, who has more power, who has more money, ultimately, and you build political institutions on top of that. Unions used to be an alternative working class institution that helped us, have some balance. Those went away. Where are we at now? Like oligarchy. And so I'm anti-oligarchy. And so as a leftist, I don't believe that the real thing today is capitalism and socialism. I think we already reconcile that. It's a mixed economy. There's good things in both. The real thing is oligarchy versus liberation. And so I'm pro-liberation, and that means human agency. It means democratic means in society, and so on.
You ever thought about running for office?
Jesus. So here's the unfortunate thing. People who have government positions don't really have any power. And I don't really sell well publicly. I don't really care for slogans and populism. And so for me, I've read every book about the Koch brothers and all those kind of things as possible, because I think we need to make a Koch network for the left and for tech, basically. So tech will not be a perfect angel. We have our own self-interest. We're going to be naive and brutal in our own way. I still think we have better stuff than the industrial class that is right now restricting us on climate change and taxes and all these other things that we want. And I think it's our job as tech to create those institutions, elect the right people and get the right policies, and then lead to the next thing. I think we're at a state change between two systems. That's why it's so tense right now. And so, locally, I work on local politics for that end. And then I look at economic stuff that would help us establish a new political economy that would lead to new organizations, which would lead to new candidates. So it's multifaceted. But yeah, me running for office, fuck no. Yeah, no, thank you. All the people I know who are in public office seem to hate their life.
So you mentioned local politics. So we've kind of talked about these things really at the large scale, national level. What's the local stuff that you care about?
Yeah, I mean, as someone who wants the tech class to actually help things in the world, I don't think we're doing a good job locally. Yeah, I know we have a mixer in the background here. So, what I'm looking at is if tech is going to do shit, why aren't we helping all the people in San Francisco? And I don't just mean directly by giving to a homeless shelter or something, which would be great too. I think it's a more systemic problem. And so I'm interested in the political awakening of the tech community in San Francisco and how we can apply that to improving the city in political means. And so I look at the city as basically a captured by special interest thing. I don't know how many people look at politics, but there's this thing called the city family. So there's the core people who are elected, the people they appoint and hire around the government. Then there's the organizations that are on the take. So all the nonprofits in the city, Waste Management famously was, getting bribed, and one of the guys was, FBI'd away recently. That's just a surface of the graft. There's a lot of graft in the city. And I think that's just the corruption that's preventing us from doing a lot of things. So this political class is a revolving door between elected people and these nonprofit leaderships. They have this whole machine, and because we're a one-party system here with just the Democrats, the local Democratic Party, the DCCC, controls an organization that is able to say who is on the primary, gets the endorsement, who gets the money from the campaign, and that is controlled by a board that is in an election that about 3,000 people vote in. And that is an obscure election you never get shit in the mail for. Our activist community gets out and we vote for this DCCC election, but it is so obscure. So there's basically 3,000 people in a political machine in San Francisco get to dictate the ballot, which dictates the people. And then we have this fucked up system we have today. So we want to build another machine and blow up that machine. And what's interesting is we're losing these supervisor elections by hundreds of votes. And so we're interested in well, how could we actually flip that? That's only 20 apartment buildings we need to build. I mean, everyone who's going to fill those buildings is going to be this city is fucked up. When I moved here, what the hell? And they're going to want to help, And so that's our take, is that we need to get people together and do this, because I think it's unfortunate, as someone who is a leftist, that the local left has unfortunately allied with the rich incumbent nativists and the grafters, because, unfortunately, the natives who are poor need help in not getting evicted or whatever, and that's good left work. But the natives who are rich and don't want anything to change and want to keep getting graft are there. So I think the natives have aligned, and I think, no, let's like get the grafters on one side and get like the forces of good on the other. But it's an unfortunate thing that that's occurred, and they call them the progressives. Yeah, exactly. And right now they're splitting like, you know, regular people versus like this graftopoulos, you know.
What does that engagement actually look like? Because there's a sense that like there's a lot more money. So total analogy, in my kids' elementary school in San Francisco, there was a sense that like parents had more and more money to give, but less and less time because of the demographics changing.
Yeah.
And that was actually not that helpful. Like they needed people to put their time in and not necessarily money. So like what sorts of things should people be doing besides just writing checks here to? Like,
Yeah, I know, it's interesting. So like, I would love to organize more tech companies in a nonpartisan way. Like, I just want to like sign everyone up to vote, talk about these elections that happen. I mean, you know, just get people involved at all. So like, I would say the tech community, I don't know if our voter turnout is great. Like, I don't know if our awareness of all this stuff, I like get pretty close to this stuff, and I do not understand all the shit in this thing more. And I bet that most people don't either. So, I mean, I think if you care about these issues, like organizations that, you know, like I helped start Grow SF, which is like doing some work in this. So that's growsf.org, SF YIMBY, California YIMBY. These are organizations that are pro-urbanism and housing that I like locally, at least. And you can just sign up, go to the meetings or Slack channels, that kind of thing. But money definitely helps. I mean, they're always fundraising, and there's a lot of candidates. Like, okay, like I think Alex Lee from some district down in the peninsula, he's like a pro-housing candidate. December 10th, there's a dinner. If you want to come, I think it's $100 or more to come. And then you can like meet the candidate and like ask questions about them, meet other people who are leaders in the community. That's the thing you could do right now. Like, just let me know. But there's one of those like every other week, you know? And so you can go there, and if you want to get involved, but I think at very least, register to vote, probably mail in and start looking at voter guides. There's a lot of voter guides. Don't look at the pissed off voter guide. That's actually the incumbents. No one knows who produces the pissed off voter guide, which is really interesting. And actually some person tried to look into it and got like sued. And so I think there's a cabal that is doing this thing. And it's like the pissed off voter guide is actually incumbents voter guide. And so I would not look at that one. There's a lot of other ones that you can look at. You know, obviously I'm going to say the YIMBY one, the Grow SF one, you know, even like Spur or something that's more centrist or whatever is fine. Like, I think they're fine too. But anyway, so I think those are at least the minimum of being informed.
The point about the DCC election.
Yeah.
Because like, I've never heard of that election, right? And I have always like been annoyed. It's like, I only have like one set of people to vote for. It's
Totally.
like, it feels like literally the decisions are made somewhere else. But
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. I mean, and there's a lot of little commissions with appointees, you know, it's really dirty. This is the machine. And like, what I would love to see happen is I would love to see the revolving door be like tech companies to people trying to get elected. And when they don't win their election, they just go back to the same company. But we can do the same shit that their nonprofits do. Like, a lot of us are very marketable, you know, in this world. And like, maybe you need some, you know, you need to save some money because the jobs don't really pay really well, you know, in there. And so you have to do your family, but there's provisions we could do to make that happen. But also be prepared for what David Chu, now the city attorney, used to be state senator, he said that in Sacramento, it's a game of chess when he was in state senate. But he said in San Francisco, it's a knife fight in the phone booth. And it is just really dirty, up close politics. Yeah.
We have a question from Rishi.
Yeah.
So one question I have for you is like, how, I think a lot of it sounds like a lot of something not my head to, but at the same time, like outside of like small conversations like this, like I'm not a very involved person.
Sure.
So like, how do you incentivize people generally in tech, especially in the area, to be more involved? Because I think you know, the environment in San Francisco has changed a lot. Maybe not really something itself, but not optimistic there actually. And it's like much worse before people actually care. And I think in other industries, like you said, being politically active is an important factor to your business.
Yeah.
So tech, we're able to kind of just sidestep this whole issue a lot of times, and you can be successful by putting your head down. And so, like, how do you kind of change that dynamic?
Yeah. Yeah, no, I love this question.
Sorry, did everyone hear it? Because Rishi's a bit far from the microphone. Can someone who's not in the room say if they heard it? Okay.
It was a little bit hard to hear it. Could you rephrase?
Like, how can we get people more involved? Even when they agree, we tend to, like, you know, be a little passive.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great question. I mean, my take is this, like, one, I'm actually more optimistic now. Like, I've seen this for like, I don't know, 4 or 5 years, I've been somewhat plugged into it. And what's happening is we're passing laws at the state, like SB 35, and I forget the one that just passed recently, that are actually leading to infill housing and density, which is in our favor. The local politicians know that everyone new comes here thinks it's fucked. And so like, they just are like, no new people because it's gonna mess up the entire like Graftopolis, you know, that we've built here. And so I think that, like, I was just at the YIMBY Gala a few weeks ago, and I remember it was like 150 people a few years ago. It was the entire roof of some building. It was like 400 people or something. And it was every politician in town had to be there. Mayor came, like all the state senators were there. Almost everyone in the council, or not council, the I forget, some of the various like elected positions were there because you have to be, because this is like actually a real political force. Matt Haney, you know, one of the district supervisors, was like super anti-housing, but because he's in a district of enough tech people, he's actually moving, and now he's running for, I think it's state senate, I forget. I'm so bad with all the elections, honestly. But to your question, how do you do it? So what my model is, and why I think that tech companies and you know, any organizational group, I think you got to find the champion. So I look for champions. So literally at the CEO dinner last night, I found 3 champions. And so my radicalization program is, first you got to say like, okay, what does this person care about? What's the community care about, right? You need a big tent. So not everyone cares about the same shit, but you need 80% alignment, you know, like even like Grow SF. They're a little bit too pro cops for me, but they're good for 80 other percent. So I'm like, cool, I'm glad it exists. You know, got to have different, you know, roughly different opinions. I'm not a dogmatist, but I think you got to find the champion in those groups that already exist, where you already have trust, and that champion can tell the group like, hey, let's do this thing. So like, for instance, if you want, like a lot of people don't know, I could, you know, I had David Chu, the city attorney, I had him over to my friend's house, and we had like 40 people do a little event. I have Chesa Boudin this Monday coming to the same thing. So I'm going to candidate through like every month. And you guys could do it too. If you had like a backyard or a little, you know, some kind of building that had enough space, I could easily get you politicians to come. You could talk to them, ask them questions. They're actually way more accessible than you think. And people don't realize. Like I remember I was involved with Josh Harder's campaign, California District 10 US House. And I remember I did a big fundraiser for him, probably raised 2% of their money or something in that fundraiser. And I mean, he would call me from Congress. Like that's how easy it is to get there. Like I max donated and I got a bunch of my friends to max donate, and like that was enough to be like, all right, cool. I could just call the student, text with someone in Congress. And it's like, people don't realize it's like that easy. And like, I think that like, I really supported him because Josh was a VC. He was like in the tech community. I wanted more smart people out there. Josh is a good moral guy. He's from the community. And so I wanted to support him, but I was always, you know, I was always surprised at how it was. So I think you got to find the champion. So if you're personally not motivated for it, I think it's like, you know, that's, you know, on you essentially. And like, I don't think we're going to. I look at people who are already kind of like, what's going on? So people last night were talking to me, and like, I know a lot about the local situation more than people who don't pay attention. And so I'm just like, hey, here's all this different stuff. And they're like, oh, interesting. And so that's the radicalization process. So I'm always like, come out to an event, see the shit. United Dems every month have a Zoom call, and it says how San Francisco politics works, or San Francisco politics 101, something like that. And you can ask all your questions to like people who know everything. So like, that's a way to understand the local situation. And there's a bunch of articles. I have a deck that I can send that I never actually made. It's like a shitty looking deck, but it has a ton of links and information that I'm happy to pass around after.
Yeah. Can I ask a follow-up question? One thing I just love to get your opinion on, because you mentioned like that.
Can you speak up briefly?
Yeah.
Sorry.
You mentioned you talk to a lot of politicians, and you're at events where you're able to kind of access these folks. What's the balance between like pragmatism versus ideology that you see? I assume that 99% of politicians are like very pragmatic in their goal is to get elected. But you mentioned Chase Boudin. It seems like there's a very much like ideological effect there. And so like, how do you view politicians and like their job and how they feel about things? Is it totally different?
Yeah.
Some tips or insight there?
Yeah, it's interesting. So yeah, so the question was like, you know, I talked to a lot of politicians. What's the balance between ideology and pragmatism? And like, you know, yeah, people like Chesa Boudin, is he more ideologically driven than pragmatic? I mean, what's interesting about him is actually, he was able to have an upset election when Susie Loftus was the fait accompli and did it. So he actually played a good like progressive ground game, because they have like the strongest ground game here to do it. I have no idea what the recall will be. That'll be interesting. I mean, I think that people are pissed about what's going on. I'm not sure if Chase is actually responsible and how much that position really can do, but certainly it's at least a moral like election, you know, on like what you want. So I would not say he's fully, I mean, I've had dinner with Chesa and, you know, everything else. And I think that like, he is a very thoughtful guy. You know, I mean, you know, full disclosure, my dad's in prison, so I know a lot about the criminal justice system. But you know, I think that like Chesa is a good dude. The system is really fucked. He's also pragmatic because he did win an election. I think they're all like, he's definitely ideologically, like his life built up to this. He wasn't like, oh, I'm just going to do this. Not every politician's like that, you know. Some seem like, oh, I'll be a politician. You know, some people do seem like that. They aren't that political in some ways, but they want this power now. I do think they're pretty pragmatic, but it's a hard one. I mean, so many people sacrifice ideology for pragmatism, and that's probably the right thing, honestly. But yeah, I don't know if it's ever like, I don't know if it's ever really something where day to day you're that, you know, it's like, yeah, like you want to pass the bill or not, you want to one step forward or not, then you have to do it. I mean, I don't know what knife edge decisions there are. I'm sure they exist, but I don't know if we're seeing that many. A lot of times it's like super compromise bill, barely squeaks by, barely doesn't. And then, you know, that's what it is. And you get your coalition and, you know, I don't know if you have to think about it that much. I think it's almost like, what's your strategy? I would say the politicians often have very bad strategy. And so the moderate political machine that doesn't exist here, I would say that like people's strategic mindset is not very good. I went around interviewing all these different organizations that I mentioned, and I was interviewing their executive directors. And I was saying like, hey, like I have a lot of friends who could donate to shit, but we're all a bunch of startup people that want to see like metrics and shit. Like, how do you actually show that you're effective, you know, and what's your strategy? And they didn't know what strategy meant, basically. They listed things that they did. And I was like, well, those are tasks and maybe projects, but they're not, you know, not strategies. But like they do know it. They don't frame it the same way. So I'd like pull it out and repeat it back and get them to agree. So I think there's some tech versus politics thing. Tech people are like, you know, really arrogant and think they know everything. You know, politicians like really like don't know a lot of the stuff that we know about the modern world. You know, there's a lot of that stuff. So we have to be humble and, you know, do our user research like we would do any other customer research. We want to help politicians. So I was kind of like interviewing them to do like customer development almost, to understand like, okay, how can I arbitrage tech, wealth, and effectiveness and culture with like politics people who actually know how to get shit done and know the intricacies of the system and the people beyond the tech community, you know?
Cool. And just for what it's worth, the reason I asked is a lot of the strategies you mentioned would work well with people that are pragmatists, whereas it seems that it's harder to make those things work with people that are very ideological.
I mean, you can manipulate ideological people with pragmatic action, right? So, I mean, you can use the activist class, you know, in a pragmatic way, even though you yourself are not, perhaps. I mean, it's interesting to know, like, I think that Chase is ideological, but I think that like he got people who don't necessarily agree with him to vote for him. And I don't think it's because they agree with everything he said, or at least like the things he said were not exactly the things he is on his wish list, but these are the things he could get elected on. You know, I think that every politician has to balance that. Of course.
Can I ask a follow-up or?
Yeah.
Ryan here. So I'm having trouble kind of picturing, like I'm seeing a lot about the process of running government and the like systems that, you know, maybe the types of people that are in power there. But I want to know where you want it to go. So like
how the government would work.
Yeah, so just let me put this in sort of concrete terms. Like you're in a coma for 20 years and you wake up. What metrics do you look at to say, hey, we've been successful or not?
Yeah, totally. No, this is a great question. I mean, I think there's a few different things that we wonder about. I mean, what are we struggling with right now? Like in many ways, I would say that there are two key problems in society. One of which is we have immense material wealth. That's basically like we could solve poverty today materially. Like we are basically post-scarcity from a technical perspective, and yet we don't do it. So that's a political power problem that like there's some people who think they're actually not going to lose their shit, but they really think they're going to lose their shit in the oligarchy, who don't want to run the factories 20% longer to like make sure everyone has a house and food and shit. Like that's true. So to me, that's one problem that like if that was not true anymore, and that like actually no one is, you know, in poverty and everyone has material stuff, that's good. But I don't think we're going to accomplish that unless the political mechanism is freed up. And so how do we think about the political system? And I like to think about it as a series of control loops. And so one question is are the people actually, when they vote, are they actually being represented by the people like proportionately? So like if 70% of America wants, you know, X type of candidates in, is that what happens? Today, that's not true. We like 70% of people or whatever would elect a very different set of people. Maybe that it turns from 70 to 50% now, you know, from a support point of view. So first, we're not represented correctly. The people, even when we get in. So if we have the, you know, slight majority or whatever, do they actually pass laws that actually do that? No, they don't. So like that's that control loop through. When the law is enacted and then the executive branch is enforcing it, does the law actually make the metric that it thinks it seeks to do? Generally not. And so each loop is broken. So when I analyze the government, I was like, okay, like, does each thing do what it says? Are we really represented? No. Do the laws actually do things? No. Are the laws even passed? No. The laws actually do things? No. So like, that's the thing to solve. And so the issue for me is I think the root problem of this is this political economy thing. It's how power is distributed from economics and existing institutions. And that power calculus is what I seek to disrupt.
But like poverty would be like a main, getting rid of poverty.
And even beyond that, I mean, I think about like, so poverty calls to mind social safety nets, right? Getting people and lifting them up. I want to do not just that, I want to do social springboards. And a social springboard is something that accelerates your life. And so I think the next type of like government services, and actually I believe in public-private versions of this, that's my human capital research, like is actually the way to accelerate people. Like I think if the ideal world, anything you want to do, you're like, hey, I want to do a thing. There's the ability for you to do that thing, you know.
This is like sort of captured by something like a economic mobility, maybe.
Well, and it's like agency. You know, if you have a bunch of money, but it's not legal to do your thing, you're not free.
Right.
You know.
Or you're doing something that you don't really like.
Yeah.
You talked about the human capital
Yeah.
work, and I think you mentioned human capital economics earlier. Like,
Yes.
what is your, tell us about that. What is that?
Yeah. So I've had a theme for about 5 years called the empowerment economy. And, you know, what I look at is, you know, the current safety net system, like there's this problem. The economy is, you know, I mentioned like the labor like issues, like not everyone is actually employed in what they want. You can't actually like improve your life easily. Like you have to be basically wealthy before you can get therapy or better job training or whatever. It's like not just in the system. Part of the issue is the system crystallizes. And so the government, it is not designed to move fast. And in some ways it shouldn't, because it would disrupt a lot of stuff if it did. You have to kind of bank on it. So I believe in the synthesis of government and markets together. And so I like things like carbon taxes, because it says, hey, what do we want? Less carbon. How do we want it? Whatever the market can figure out the fuck to remove carbon, as long as we can audit it. Like, that's how it happens. So I like, you know, I wanted to have a t-shirt of just like carbon tax and chill. Like that's kind of my thought. That's not fully true apparently, because of some of the mechanisms. We need to have more funding and some of the fundamental technology, but I think that it would go a huge way. It's like 80% of the problem is probably carbon tax and chill. So I'm interested in human capital investment and chill. So like, how would we do this investment? So one is like having the money, where's the money come from? And the other one is like, what does the money do? And so I think that like, you know, the user interface and feedback loop between, you know, I want to go to, you know, let's say I want to get food stamps, and I go to a thing and I apply, and there's like all this stuff. And like, say I think, wow, that's a really bad user experience to get food stamps. Do I vote for a different person? Like, and then, you know, there's like this huge set of loops, right? That like, that's never going to happen. And everyone have to be super up in arms in the street for anything to happen. And it never does. So that's the wrong consumer experience. So like the government could be rearranged for better incentives, but I'm not betting on that right now. So I'm looking at private ways for where does the money come from? Wall Street. Where does it go? Main Street. How do we actually make that tunnel? Via human capital instruments that are able to allocate, you know, basically finance to people to invest in these human capital things. So you need to know what a person is good at. What are the jobs they would likely be able to do? What is the training that you could likely get? And like then clear that market. The issue is no one knows the data to make that bankable. We know if you go to MIT for a CS degree, you will get a job and you will pay off the loan. Like banks know that, they're willing to bank on that. But we do not know about anything else other than 4-year degrees. And so what we're looking at is all these new data sets are just becoming available that allows us to do the risk calculations and success metrics on all these various things. So I can say this given person with this profile, this training, this knowledge, this personality would be a good fit for this program, this career. And here's all the different ones. And hey, like job seeker, check this thing out. This could be your life. And like, I imagine this entire like life management system where it's like, you know, what are your major problems? I don't have enough money. My healthcare sucks. Like I'm depressed. Like, you know, okay, cool. Here's all the things to solve your problem. Like we don't like, why the hell don't we have that in society? And that's the human development of metamodernism is like, if we want to do human development, why don't we have systems to do that? In society right now, we're very good at, if we want something material wealth, we want a physical object or we want a system, you just put money in it and we systematically create that. We now have the ability to just poof, create wealth, right? We do not have the poof to create meaning in someone's life. And so for me, the life management system is a meaning creation device. It's not just economic. Economic breeds the freedom to then find your meaning and to pursue meaning, you know, and not just work, but like life and everything else. And so that's sort of like the causality chain that I look at in the human capital project. And what we found is there's a lot of interventions that are not being funded that are on the risk return curve, and we could sell securitized bonds to Wall Street. And actually, I know someone doing it for income share agreements for coding schools, and Wall Street loves this shit, and they just can't get enough of the agreements. And so I'm looking at like, okay, cool, where can we do it? You know, so it's a whole thing.
I'm really glad you mentioned income share agreements because that was my next question.
Yeah.
So is a like concrete manifestation of this, like finding people to fund ISAs for like vocational school with a bunch of really good modeling behind it and the user experience? So like somebody comes in and says like, oh, actually I could learn how to weld, and they take out an ISA. Is that sort of the—
So that's one model. I'm not an ISA, authoritarian on this thing. Like, it's like, whatever. ISA is one thing. They have problems and they're like kind of hard for a lot of people to understand. So we're trying to figure out, are our ISAs the right thing? But you know, there are many different, like we see human capital options, futures, like I do a lot of financial shit. I love finance. And so there's a lot of different ways you can do it. You got to make sure that the consumer, just regular people can understand it, which is what's hard about ISAs. But yeah, just for an example, yeah, welding boot camp ISA pairing would be an example of a human capital intervention in that. But the issue is we look at human capital interventions as bundles. So not only do you need a welding certificate, but to get one, maybe you need like childcare, and maybe you need an emergency car repair, and like this kind of stuff, because like we find that welding programs have really high attrition rates because the people in them are more precarious than people in college. And we find poor people in college actually have very high attrition rates for the same reason. So like a lot of colleges have their own funds that actually help people with their car payment if they get behind or something, just so they can keep doing the thing and not lose their job and then lose their schooling. So there's a lot of stuff where you need like kind of wraparound services to do it. So that's where I look at like what are intervention sets on a multivariate perspective. And the unfortunate thing is the literature is single variate because no one has any money to study this. So we only look at one intervention in a vacuum when it's actually, we know a systemic problem, but you can't find the data. But now we have the data on a population level. So what if someone looked at it? We're looking at it. Like, that's the idea.
Awesome. So we can open it up for questions from the metaphorical floor.
We also have the list of questions. Do you think we covered that all?
We can delve further into the list too.
Yeah.
I have my own.
Nice.
Nobody answered. So the one I had, totally shifting gears.
Okay.
Back into the space of kind of manufacturing and engineering. What are the big problems that you don't see anyone trying to solve right now?
Oh man, that's a good question. I feel like we haven't done enough. And so there's this thing called generative CAD design. And the idea is generally a single part, you have something like, I want the lightest weight thing that still maintains this strength relationship, for instance, say support structure for a bike or something, and you use 3D printing to like hollow it out, use mathematics to hollow it out, and then you print this very complicated thing. That's neat for very high performance shit. It's cool. I don't think that's the main reason to use generative. I'm really interested in CAD that sort of is more, in the software world, we have frameworks that are able to like, you type a little bit and this giant thing happens. We don't have anything like that in the CAD world, basically. And so I'm interested in like how you could generatively have these programs that would allow you to like say, I need a gearbox that does this. And instead of me saying, I want this gear and I need this bearing, and all that shit, I want it to just happen. And I want the CAD to be way more flexible in doing this, or at least find me the gearbox that I want or something. So I think that meta level, we're not seeing that much meta. And I think it's because we're like a little bit early. I'm actually I'm on the advisory board of a company called Volve AI, which is actually doing this for drones and race cars. So they're optimizing like, just for example, like the tires and brakes and aero and all the different stuff on a race car. And they're doing simulations of millions of them. And they're twiddling these variables and then running all these race simulations to then see if it works. I would love more of that stuff. I think there's so many manufacturing processes, like hundreds, that have yet to have anyone do any automation on them. And so like that's just open. You just like, I keep seeing like the plethora of blank companies come out. And so I'm like,
Do they
cool.
identify themselves that way?
I mean, some do. Yeah. I mean, some guy I met last night was like, I'm the plethora of high volume, whatever, and like, it's really funny. And I was like,
You
cool.
made it.
Yeah. Right. But yeah, so I try to just like advise these companies. And so I end up playing this role where all those companies come to me, and then I end up helping them with like their plans and stuff. And just like, you're a CEO the first time, how do you do this shit? So I have actually put a comment in there, which is my Nick on management document, which is like my management philosophy with all the books and like how to use them basically, but I end up giving them that. And then I like try to help them raise money because I know all the VCs, and the VCs trust that like I know what I'm talking about. in that world. And so then I typically get on the advisory board and then help them do that. But there are many, many more, you know, if someone wanted to make, I'm trying to think of even like, I don't know, like stamping as a surface, you know, so stamping is like, if you think about like a metal like spoon or something, it comes out of a sheet, right? You make a what's called a die and you stamp it out of the thing. No one has that as a service. You can just do it. It's like you talk to people on the phone or whatever. You can do that. That's totally a company you can make. It's a complicated process, but like you could totally do it. There's a lot of these things where there's a book that I love. My favorite manufacturing book is called Manufacturing Processes for Design Professionals. Beautiful coffee table book, lots of pictures, and there's like 100 processes in there. And I bet I've seen 3 of them automated. And so there's just a lot you could do on this, and no one's doing it. So like wide open, like I'm just looking around here, right? So you can look around. Okay, so we've got paper pulping and shit that's doing this. You've got, this is what, vacuum forming on this. Neither of those processes, the tooling is automated. We have, this is you know, glass, what is it? Glass pressing, right? Glass pressing, totally, no one's automated that. You know, you could have custom glasses on demand if you wanted to for probably like a few $1,000s of setup if you just did the math and all the other shit, but no one has done it, you know? So like, and I've even asked people, like, they're like, hey, could you make an automated, like, actually there would be blow molding for bottles. They wanted custom, like, you know, say for alcohol, you could have custom bottles that were really cool. It's like, well, you know, you could totally do that. So I'm on the advisory board of another company called Atomic Machines or Industries. God, I get them confused, Industries. And they're making automated injection molding. So you know how this would be made. They're making an automated injection molding company that generates the mold and cuts it and shoots it. So I think that's a lot of stuff that has yet to be explored. It's hard, I grant you, but it's definitely not explored enough. Novel CADs, I'm like really interested in novel CAD, and I'm really interested in like automating it. So it's almost like engineering tool side, how to make more leverage on the mechanical project, and then in a factory, how do you automate it and like make these systems that can like work more like a data center almost, you know, not like a guy's twiddling knobs on a machine and listening to it to do it, which is literally what's happening today. It's like a black art from the high priests of manufacturing, you know.
I have a question for Nick, but okay. So you're obviously very well read. You think deeply about life philosophies, and you've tested out a lot of your beliefs in discussions with others. What are some examples when you have changed your mind, and what made you change your mind?
Oh, geez. Yeah, I mean, a lot. Like I grew up as a Pentecostal evangelical, like hardcore right-wing Republican in the middle of nowhere, Pennsylvania. So like I've come away, you know, from there. You know, I think that like first I was really insular and everyone around me believed the same thing, you know, and then I got the hell out of there, thankfully, because I got into school. And so I went to Pittsburgh, which may be a bigger leap to go from middle of nowhere to Pittsburgh than Pittsburgh to San Francisco, because I was like, whoa, Thai food. I've never heard of Thailand, you know, like this kind of thing. And so like, even just like a cafe, I'd never seen a cafe or even knew that was a concept. Like, I know it's like weird shit like this, you know? But yeah, so I think that I met atheists for the first time. And like, you know, one of my best friends in Pittsburgh, his parents were like a sci-fi author and an astrophysicist. And so he had a totally different perspective, but I loved science my whole life, so I could engage with that. And then, you know, I ended up just doing an exhaustive, like I tried to defend Christianity. And so I went to like a seminary and talked to all these people and read all these books, and, you know, I just like explored it, but I was like, nope, this is actually wrong, after going like really deep. So I feel like I tend to go really deep on it, but like, yeah, you want to know what truth actually is. And then I became like a libertarian atheist. And then I moved out here and became like a leftist atheist, but maybe post-rationalist as well, not just a naive atheist.
So the environment shapes you in a way.
Yeah, no, I think so. And then now I just like read books and call the authors and talk about their stuff. Like, it's like amazing. Like, I mean, as long as it's not like, I don't know, someone who's super, what would you call it?
Married to their idea.
Well, not even that. I'm just thinking like people who are really popular, you know, Malcolm Gladwell, what?
Rock stars.
Yeah, you can't get to them very easily, although sometimes I meet them at events or whatever, but often the rock stars are too mass market and they're boring and they don't have anything interesting to say. So you got to talk to like their references, you know, so who are they actually referencing? Talk to them about their paper, and you always get someone to respond to you. So that's kind of my method. Yeah.
That's a really good point. Like even just, you know, somebody that wrote a paper, right? A scientific paper. Like,
yeah.
I like sat down with like a PhD student at Berkeley like a little while ago, and I paid her for like 2 hours consulting, right? And it was super interesting and cheap, right? But like it never occurred to me before that you could go just like reach out to people. Right?
Yeah, I actually love the consultant thing. Like I'm a power user of Upwork. And so I love going on Upwork and just being like, hey, this person knows this crazy thing that I want. Okay, cool. Like, yeah, grab an hour with them and just talk about it. You know, like I wanted to know how to securitize bonds. And so I found a banker on Upwork for an hour, and for like $100 or something, I was like, cool, like this is, he told me about these various boutique bond rating agencies, and I got their diligence docs, and I was like, okay, cool. I know how to securitize, read my first mortgage-backed security. It was great. Yeah, exactly.
When you think about moving technology forward in the manufacturing and industrial industries, how much these days is like, what's the split between hardware and software? A lot of stuff we talk about, I think hardware, but a lot of stuff we talk about sounding more software.
Yeah. So how I think that there's two ways you could think about this, and both are valid. Like some people are creating new hardware to get new performance and capability. So I actually met a guy last night, never met this guy before, but he is making 3D printed long chain carbon fiber like stuff. So, normally like this is vacuum forming. So you take a hot sheet and you suck it over a form. But if you had strands of carbon fiber, it doesn't work like that because the strands won't warp, And so they are 3D printing a way to do that. And I was like, okay, that's a performance increase. So the real question is, do you need more performance, or do you need to be faster, cheaper, or whatever of the same thing? So I think more about the latter, because I think most shit is not fancy. And so, if most shit's not fancy, then the hardware is largely not the problem. It's like, well, the machines already exist. It's the old man's brain that's the hard part. And the old man can't even fully explain why they know how to do this stuff, because it's like an intuitive, like knock on it and tweak this thing kind of exercise. And so sometimes you need hardware for like the sensing of like the old man's ears and fingers, literally. And so that's when I see hardware being useful in that way. But I think a lot about like software problems with the existing machine. So at Plethora, like the more we just bought off the shelf hardware, the better. And so we were basically just off the shelf hardware, almost everything. And it was all a software problem.
And so if there's a lot of these things are software problems, you mentioned like, you had just mentioned a few of these ideas like, hey, this isn't automated, that's not automated.
Yep.
They're all viable businesses.
Yes.
In like pure software world, for the SaaS consumer, whatever, like for every good idea, there's like 25 startups going after it.
Yeah.
And then every time any notable like angel, VC, whatever, puts out a request for startup for ideas.
Yep.
Immediately you're gonna take people jump on that stuff.
Yeah.
Why is that not happening in this industry? If it has
Yep.
a software effect, like is there just like are we at a point in time where there's just an arbitrage and that's gonna go away quickly?
So there's a few things I think. I think venture capitalists, I think the old adage is invest in what you know. And most of those guys are not hardware guys. So, I don't invest in any consumer shit because I don't know shit about consuming. So like, I'm a weirdo. So like, I don't think I know what regular people think. So I don't try to do that. But I think it's the same thing. So there's not that many VCs who were mechanical engineers or anything like that. So that's a big problem. Then the founder base of people who even know any of that shit exists is very thin. Like a lot of the companies I work with, like Volve is in London, FormLogic is in Pittsburgh, Path Robotics is in Cleveland or Columbus. These are Midwestern, it's because, like they were from those families, that built stuff. And so was I. So like in many ways, they're very heritable how this happens, I think. So like a lot of people grow up liking web stuff. You don't need any permission for that. Well, in hardware, I used to buy micrometers at the flea market to like I was a nerd and I lived in an area where I could actually do it because the flea market had old men who would sell me their shit really cheaply because it was like hilarious that like a 12-year-old cared about metalworking. So I think that like the founder base isn't there and also the VCs aren't there. So one of the things I'm trying to figure out is how could we go deeper into the mechanical research community in universities and other labs and give them permission to be startup people, because they are not thinking that way. They're thinking they're going to go to like GE or something. And the coolest thing is like, oh, I'd love to work on the jet turbine for whatever, like that's sexy, and no one's thinking, oh, I would make a company that made jet turbines, it's not like the CS world where like, you're going to have one class about like, lean startup or something in your school necessarily now. They don't do that. So I would love to see it from that. And that's actually where some of the guys I know came from. They came from academic programs in the Rust Belt,
Gotcha. And so why is that your strategy to go after people that are not founders rather than like try and make converts out of founders that exist in mass numbers here and just point in this direction of, hey, like there's white space over
I just tend to not find it, is what it is. I think that a lot of founders are not trying to solve some super hard problem like this. They would love productivity SaaS software they can sell to sales teams. Like, something that's like a rinse and repeat, like anyone understands that, all the metrics are understandable, technical risk is very low. These are not low technical risk companies. So I think the reason they're in academia is like, the path robotics guy, well, they did a PhD and this was their thesis, same for Vault. One of their guys in a PhD program for AI stuff. This is his thesis. Like, that's why it ends up happening is the government can sponsor it, your PhD can sponsor it, like something like this. Like the guy who did Proto Labs, he was an engineer, he was in a garage, just doing this for years before it became a business, because that's kind of the person that would do it. So it's interesting. I think you need to de-risk that tech to even yourself think you can do it, and we were kind of crazy at Plethora where I was like, I just think we can fucking do it. And then I was able to raise money because there was a mechanical engineer who later became a VC who was at SpaceX, and he was like, yes, I know this is a problem. And then he did it. So like, I just got very lucky, that like the combination key just turned, and all the tumblers were in place. But yeah, I'm open to any way. It tends to be the other way.
Any final thoughts for Nick as we wrap up?
I mean, I had a question. I've been
Yeah.
sort of holding.
Nice. This is the surprise question that I can't answer.
So we have this world where there's a lot more automation and maybe artificial intelligence. And a lot, you talked about like creating work opportunities for people and investing in human capital. At the same time, we're sort of maybe leading towards a world where human capital is actually largely more and more irrelevant to interacting with physical capital and the generation of the things we need.
Yeah.
So what's the structure of society? Like, how are we living in 50 years?
Yeah, love it.
We actually, maybe no one needs to work.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, and to me, it's actually invariant of whether people need to work or not.
Yeah.
So, human development is not just about producing money. It's hopefully not about that.
Right.
The money right now is a liberatory force. So you're talking about post-liberation.
Yeah.
Like I always think about like this theme of like, what are humans really? Like, what is the true work of humans? And so like, let's just say we did have the, let's say friendly AI, somehow it was safe. And they could do anything we wanted. What do humans do? We live in some utopia where you can just snap your fingers and a thing appears. What do we do all day?
Or it's all owned by one guy and, we're just,
Well, then you revolt.
Yeah, right. So it's sort of,
I'm going to assume the good scenario.
Okay.
Because the other scenario involves like explosives.
Yeah.
Which is cool too. We got to know that too. What?
What's a good equilibrium?
Well, I think that for me, what humans are actually like do, and this gets back to like, like basically the basis of like value theory and philosophy is about ethics and aesthetics, and like where you derive those from are arbitrary axiomatic decisions. There's actually at a certain point, you just have to feel that way, man. And so, to determine those aesthetics, we have democracy because everyone doesn't have the same aesthetics. And so democracy is how we reconcile our aesthetics on what kind of society we want. And so in the case of having a massively automated, whatever utopia machine, we still have to say, well, do you get to build by the coast or does everyone get to do that? Like, that's still a question. Like, and we would still need to say what our aesthetics are. So we are aesthetic machines. And so if we think about something, I think about Maslow consumption. So if you look at the pie of GDP and you look at Maslow's hierarchy, I know Maslow's not perfect, but let's just use it as a model. We don't have to say it's hierarchical. After you get these things more and more, what it's funny right now, the entire GDP, like 80% is just the bottom layer. It's just like housing, food, clothing, like it's just that. Then like, yeah, we have like eating out as maybe a bit of like entertainment and esteem, that's like kind of middle layer. Very little like self-actualization stuff. So like, what if the entire economy was actually like 80% self-actualization and it was actually just everyone doing that? Like, I think that's more what it looks like. So I look at like, remove all those bottom slices of the Maslow because it's the utopia machine doing it. And suddenly like, we're all looking at self-actualization. And it's more of a, the school of Athens, we're discussing what is the good, and trying to get like whatever art aesthetics that we like, whatever ethical aesthetics we like. That's what I think humanity would become.
Or it's Wall-E or sitting chairs.
Yeah.
Well, so this is assuming the safe AI. I'm not sure that's a safe assumption. I'm probably 200-year pessimistic on humanity being around.
Mhm.
And I don't mean that in some brutal way. I mean that I think we'll fuse with machines. I think we'll not be around because I think we'll fuse with machines and humans will become vestigial to that system. And so that's basically what I think in like, a couple hundred years. I hope I'm not right. No, not even the Matrix. It's like, imagine like we have phones in our pocket, we'll have implants, 30, 50 years or something. And then you keep doing that, like what's the human for at that point? And it's like, would a raw machine outcompete the human? Probably. Like, what's the human for? Or like, if the human isn't connected to the system, are we even agent at all? Like why are we there? It doesn't seem like a sustainable equilibrium. you know. Yeah. Well, I mean, if you did that, then what's the ship you're building? If you made a digital human body in like the Matrix or whatever, and you're still like, say your cognition, but 1,000,000 times faster, you overclock yourself. Well, you're still inside of the human like cortical system. You're not actually in the most like this is, you know, we didn't evolve the best absolute way of programming on a given runtime ever. You could probably make a better algorithm that runs on a different thing better than you could simulate this or emulate this inside. And so I think given that, the human experience is actually vestigial to computation and to like replication in general. That is my take.
We are over time, so I'm going to propose we wrap up
Sure.
with the people who are not IRL, but I don't know if Nick, you have a few more minutes for the people in the
Oh
room.
yeah, I can go on
You
forever.
haven't
Yeah.
finished your pizza, so
Yeah,
thanks
right.
everyone. Thank you so much
Thank
to
you.
Nick
Yeah,
Thank you for coming. That was awesome.
for
Awesome,
coming
yeah.
here. Thank you to Adam for moderating. Thank you to everyone for participating.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, of course. Okay, thanks everyone.